New Year celebrations will be severely scaled back here in France. The fireworks show here in Paris has been cancelled, and nightclubs across the country remain shut. For more on this story, we can bring in our international affairs editor, Armen Georgian. Armen, what are some of the coronavirus restrictions which kick into effect today?
Well, the most visible ones are masks on the street. That is a mask mandate that went into force today, December the 31st. But apart from that, Delano, not a huge amount actually changes on New Year's Eve. There's a traditional fireworks display which has been cancelled. That wasn't really a big surprise. Discos were already supposed to be closed. We kind of knew more or less what the restrictions were going to be. The changes already come in on January the 3rd. That's when there'll be no more drinking standing up in bars and cafes. People will have to be seated. That's obviously proved controversial with bar and cafe owners, and also a new restriction on long-distance trains in France. No eating or drinking during the journey. That has led to a lot of a bit of a backlash on social media from users. That's when things become, I think, a little bit more visible in terms of changes in people's everyday lives on January the 3rd. But as for tonight, there was an interesting poll, a Harris Interactive poll, in which 63% of respondents said that they were not going to do any festivities anyway tonight. That was, regardless of what the government was going to impose. They just decided that because of this very high number of infections every day, these record numbers of Omicron infections, a lot of people have decided they're just going to have a quiet evening anyway, perhaps just with their partner or with one or two loved ones, but really much scaled back. So that was a kind of voluntary scaling back that a lot of people had decided to do anyway for this evening.
Armin, these new restrictions have come into effect, but the government has put off issuing any nighttime curfew or lockdown. But back in the summer, we were told that if we were vaccinated, we would get back a sense of normality. But it doesn't seem like anything is normal, does it?
No, not at all. And, we're back to some of the more surreal situations that I remember in previous waves of the pandemic in France, where, for example, where I live, there's one main avenue where masks were compulsory, but another one which intersects it, masks were not compulsory, even though they were effectively exactly the same kind of thoroughfare. So we're back to some of those more surreal moments where people in bars are effectively being told that it's more contagious for them if they stand at a bar counter, but if they sit down, even if it's a relatively crowded indoor space, that somehow it's going to be less contagious in a seated area. And then this whole business about not eating or drinking on trains, people also saying, well, what happens with mothers that have to feed their young children on a 7 or 10-hour train journey? How does that work? So we're back to, people giving some quite cynical and ironic reactions on Twitter to these new restrictions which are about to come in, saying, we're back to some of these more absurd moments in previous waves of the pandemic, with the big difference, as you mentioned, that there's a pretty high vaccination rate now. And so the big challenge in 2022 is going to be not just for the French government, but governments and public health authorities of highly vaccinated countries around the world, is what to do about the fact that the vaccine does not stop transmission of the virus. And there's no saying that we might not get an even more contagious variant next year. Who knows? But really, this is something that I think no government or public health authority has got its head around. All we do know is that, as the World Health Organization has said, simply providing boosters every few months is not going to get everybody out of this mess, even in highly vaccinated populations. So the answer is still elusive, Delano.
Armin, thank you very much for that, Armen Georgian there.